bedrooms or wherever you might be watching the tour. So what are we going to discover today? You might have joined one of our downtown tours on your visits here in Zurich. You might have watched the downtown video tour that we have. There you have learned a lot about the Romans, guilds, 13th century and whatnot. But today what we're going to discover is not older than 150 years. We're going to discover how the industrial part of Zurich has changed, how gentrification, urbanization what has it done to the district. And the flagship of that is what we're standing in front of right now, the Prime Tower. Its height is 126 meters and it was opened in 2011. Back then, believe it or not, it was the tallest building that we had here in Switzerland. But it was only for 4 years because in Basel, a new tower was opened, the Roche Tower, at 178 meters. If we think about it, we have a bit of a rivalry between Zurich and Basel. In my opinion, that can't be a coincidence that only 4 years after we had the highest building in Switzerland that they opened theirs, but that's a discussion for a whole other video, I assume. So before we continue walking, I would love to give you a bit more about Zurich West, about its history, what happened, how it developed. So Zurich West became only really important in the 19th century with the first companies, industrial companies, moving out of the city center and coming here. It started to develop, it was more and more important, more or less until the 60s, when it reached its peak with 125,000 people working in this district. Slowly but steadily it started to decline until the end of the 90s. And what happened in the 90s is, obviously, as you can imagine, empty space. So a lot of artists started moving out here, a lot of smaller companies started moving out here because it was affordable. Zurich is a very expensive city. So this development started to change the entire face of this industrial district. So at the end of the 90s, the city realized that something has to be done. And the idea was that it becomes a multi-purpose district of Zurich, meaning people should be working here, people should be living here, and people should be enjoying themselves here, people should be studying something. So we're going to discover in the next couple of minutes what the answer to that was. Let's go. So we cannot forget as well that it was a plan by the city. So plans sometimes turn out very well, sometimes they don't. So we have to also acknowledge that this plan got criticized for certain things, that it hasn't reached its purpose. So we can't forget about that. And the first place that we're going to discover is basically a plot of land where people still say this is one of the only places where this plan actually is working perfectly. In other places it's not working as much in harmony as it was thought to be to begin with. So let's go to that place. So here we are. If we look into our back, this is the plot of land that I was referring to. Later on, we will discover a bit the rest of this plot of land. It's quite it's quite big, And what was happening here is basically it was small commercial buildings. There was workshops and so on during the industrial era, because as you can imagine, smaller companies also use the synergies of an industrial district. But as the big players started moving out or going to other places to Far East and so on and so forth, these shops also started to close down. And this was, as you can imagine, one of the first places where artists opened up their ateliers, small workshops, and also a culinary offer started to come in. One of the very interesting things that we have here is the so-called Frau Gerolds garden, and if you translate it literally to English, it means Miss Gerolds garden. And as the name implies, there is a garden in there. There's a garden in there. There is also artists that can fulfill themselves. There is street artwork on the walls and so on. And it is also a restaurant, a gastronomic offer in there. To begin with, it was a short-term lease because they didn't know what's going to happen. Because the initial plan of the city was that the entire plot of land becomes the new Congress Center of Zurich. But here, I have to tell you a story because of something very interesting happened, and this is actually something that in Switzerland we are very proud of. It's something happened. What happened was basically a very strong democracy. So a owner of a plot of land, a very sizable plot of land, refused to sell his piece of land to the city of Zurich that the Congress Center can be built. Because he was happy how this district was developing, because there was multiple things that were happening here with short-term leases such as cafes, ateliers, design furniture shops and so on. So they were very happy how diverse, how multicultural it was. So they were happy with that, so they refused to sell that plot of land. So this place that was basically a pop-up idea at the end became something that was permanent. Since 2012, they're here now, and it has become very popular. At the end of the day, if you think about it, you're sitting next to train tracks and you're enjoying a beer, coffee, whatever that might be, and it has become very popular during the summer in particular. As you can imagine, due to the current situation, it is closed, but if you drop by in summer in Zurich, this is definitely one of the places that you can get a cold beer or your cup of coffee. The second place I would like you to notice here is the tower in the back. If you look at this tower, you can see on the very top, you can see the Freitag name. For particularly in Europe, the Freitag brand will ring a bell. It is originally from Zurich. It was founded by two brothers, the Freitag brothers, in 1993. And it is basically a very sustainable bag and accessories brand. So what happened is that these two brothers were studying we'll be back. So they were studying design. As you can imagine, they had their artwork with them all the time, and they were cycling a lot, as many students do here in Zurich. So what happened when it was raining, their plants got wet and all their artwork was being destroyed. So they were looking for materials that they can transform into bags that would protect their artwork. So they were looking out of their window and they saw the trucks entering Zurich, and they saw the truck tarps in the back, and they realized this is basically made for that, to protect goods that are behind the trucks for any weather that can be. So they started reaching out to these companies and reusing the tarps in order to make bags out of them. And this was a trend they realized very early. In 1993, they started already upcycling materials that would otherwise end up in landfill or in the waste. So they started making bags out of these tarps. And they're very durable and they're very unique. So they cut out these pieces until today very locally, and they have become a global brand. And until today, they're using recycled material. Until today, they are doing a lot of their manufacturing here in Zurich. This is their flagship store that we have here located in Zurich West, and it is recycled chip containers, very aligned with their brand. And one of the best things about the shop is actually at the very, very top, where you have an observation platform that will enable you to see the entire plot of land that I was referring to since the beginning of the stop. Alright, so we have just walked along this plot of land that I was referring to from our last stop, and we have also seen some of the alleys of this place. As you can see, there were many furniture shops, art shops, and so on, and this is actually the beauty of this place. And what we have here as well is a lot of nightclubs and nightlife. It has changed in the last couple of years. It was the nightlife hub in the beginning of the decade, I would say. Today it is changing a bit, but these clubs were also a temporary solution to begin with because of the Congress Center that was supposed to be built here. But until today, the leases got extended because of the land that wasn't they were not able to acquire, thanks to the landlord that was not willing to sell it. So these nightclubs still exist, and they're generally a bit the alternative segment. And what happens here, what I like to share with you, is a burger stand that I think is a very clever businessman, because they have their stand right next to the club over there, and this burger stand only opens at 11 p.m. So during the weekend they open very late. They're open until 12 the next day. So throughout the entire night they have their burger open. It's among the best burgers that you can get here in Zurich. And I know what you will be saying. You will be saying, all right, drunk, you can put ketchup on a piece of cardboard and you can eat it, but I tried it sober as well. The burgers are still very delicious. So this is a really cool place, and I think a very good businessman that he came up with the idea to open his burger stand when the nightclub is open. So before we continue to the next stop, I want to encourage you, if you have any questions, leave a comment, and then we will try get back to you, because generally on a tour you can make me stop. Right now, unfortunately, you can't. So hopefully we will be the current crisis is going to be over soon, and we will be able to offer you the tours that we offer every day again. So our Zurich West tour starts at 3 p.m. and it's very simple to find. You see the Prime Tower in the back. It's very obvious. It's still the highest building in town. So you have to take tram number 4 from the city center, and you go right at the foot of the Prime Tower, and that's where we meet at 3 p.m. once we're allowed to give tours again. So we are currently walking on the Seal Viaduct. So there's 2 viaducts. There's one that was transformed into a pedestrian viaduct around the millennium, and on top we have the viaduct that is still being used by the trains. So they both date back to the 19th century, and they were used to connect Zurich to the outskirts basically. And until today, the upper viaduct connects Zurich to Oerlikon, which is a city slightly outside of the city center. We're walking along this viaduct that will connect us to the other side of the river later on. And what we can see from here as well is these houses and the park that we're going to discover later on as well. And I would like to focus a moment to the houses that we see in the back. These houses were built by a housing cooperative as an initiative to offer affordable housing. They were built in 1973, and this is a perfect example of why certain people criticize how the industrial district was developed here in Zurich. The idea was good, the execution sometimes wasn't flawless, because here we have the affordable housing on this side of the viaduct, basically where the industry started later, was where the industry was. So on the other side of the viaduct, we had all the factory buildings. All these factory buildings now were transformed into lofts, and what is being criticized very often is the prices of the apartments that are on the other side. So the intention was to have a multi-purpose, multicultural for everyone from Zurich, a district for everyone. But at the end of the day, in order to live here, you either live on this side of the viaduct, and on the other side of the viaduct, the apartment rents are very high and very steep. So this is one of the criticisms that the people from Zurich have regarding the development of the Zurich West, basically. Here we are in front of Josefswiese, is a park that we have here in the industrial heart of Zurich. It was already built during the industrial period. It was built at the beginning of the 20th century, and its history is quite interesting because we have a lot of places like this actually in Zurich, green parks. Zurich is quite green city, and the interesting part happened actually during the Second World War, because Switzerland tried to be self-sufficient during the Second World War, and a lot of places like this park that we have here in the back were used for different purposes, because the food supply was, as you can imagine, because Switzerland was surrounded by countries that were occupied by the Nazis, quite a big question. So what happened is that all these parks were reused. These parks were used as potato fields and crop fields, and this was one of them as well. Even bigger squares, very central, were used for that. We hope obviously that we will not be using these parks for something like that again, because our food supplies for the moment here in Switzerland are generally secured for next 3 months. We will see in a second another place that makes this happen. So, another part of the story of this park that we have here is actually a very dark chapter of Zurich's history, and it dates back to the end of the 90s. What happened here in Zurich is that we had an open drug scene. So, in Zurich became at the end of the 90s a place where people were taking drugs in an open manner. So particularly bad was the park behind the train station and the park just up there. But all the parks were impacted by that because there were so many drug addicts coming from all over the place, from everywhere in Europe. They were traveling to Zurich because Zurich had become a place, a hub for that. That all the parks became a scene of this open drug problem that we had here in Zurich. And one of the places was also Josefswiese. It wasn't as heavily impacted as the other two parks close to the train station, but it was a place where needles were found, where drug addicts hung out, and so on. And this problem was solved in 1994. First of all, by strictly regulating the drug traffic. So the police stepped in basically. Also, the parks were revamped basically to give it less incentive for the drug addicts to come to the parks. And lastly, drug addicts they started to give them the drugs in a controlled environment that with clean needles in a dosage that they can reduce it later on in order to fight their addiction. So thanks to these measures, Zurich got rid of that problem that was devastating Zurich in the 90s. we can also see a bit more about the housing situation that I was referring to. So here we can see again a bit more affordable housing. Later on, you will see on the other side of the viaduct what I'm criticizing about a bit of the split. Here we have a bit more affordable housing. Later on, we will see a bit more the upper end of the rent prices here that we have in Zurich West. So here we are at the next attraction that we can see in my back is the big concrete building that we have, and it is of big controversy here in Zurich. Some people love that 118 meters concrete building, others hate it. So let me share with you what it is all about. So in the industrial part of Zurich, there's obviously a mill as well. So the main mill of Switzerland, producing 30% of the crops that are being used in Switzerland, helping to have a food reserve of 3 months here in Switzerland. So what happened is that the local authorities decided to build on top of the 40 meters tower that we had back then, the rest to 118 meters. They wanted to increase it to 118 meters. They have decided that in the local parliament. But again, now I'm coming to something that Switzerland is very well known for its direct democracy. So what happened is that the district that is directly impacted was heavily against that project. So they filed a petition in order to ask the population. So they filed the petition, it was successful, they had enough signatures, and the population of Zurich was asked in 2011 what they thought about the project of a concrete building with no windows of 118 meters, which is located right at the entrance if you leave Zurich from the highway. One moment. Yeah, unfortunately we cannot switch off the noise of the trains, so I had to stop for a moment. So they asked the population what they thought about that project, because the project had to be displayed publicly and openly what it is all about. So they asked the population, and the population in 2011 agreed with a 60% vote that they want to have the 118 meters tower that is supposed to become the mill of Switzerland. And this is what we have today, the tower. And there was a big controversy, big discussions about it. Some people say it looks ugly, we should put some art on it, we should put some climbing plants on it. And this was the idea. So far, nothing has happened, so they haven't really made it more appealing to the eye of the people that criticize it. So far, it is how it is. It's the same view as we have it since 2013. It might change in the future. So before we continue, I would again encourage you to write any questions you have in the comment section, and we will get back to you with our answers. And I'm going to take away the first question that probably a lot of people will have. What are these black things that we see on the tower? The black things are solar panels. So there you have your first answer. Something I want to share with you is the trams here in Zurich. So the trams are the main means of transportation that we use next to our bicycles, obviously. But one tram I have to highlight in particular, it's tram number 4. Tram number 4 itself is almost like a city tour. So if you ever have the chance to come to Zurich, that's and if you don't want to listen to me telling you stories, that's a tram that you can take. And it will take you literally from the lake part of Zurich, go over the main squares, go along the river, continue to the train station, and slowly but steadily make its way along these tracks here to Zurich West and end up in the outskirts. So I highly recommend, if you just want to look out of the window and think about nothing, tram number 4 is a great way to discover the city itself. So, here we have just entered the heart of an old brewery, and I love to come here because it is a place where it summarizes perfectly what Zurich West stands for. To our left, the red building that you have seen is a building that is a clinic today and houses office space as well. So this is the place where people work. On the other side, the black building that you have seen is a residential building. So we have people working, people living at the same place. At the same time, we have an art museum that is just located in the same district as a bit in front. So it is in the same brewery. We have people living, people working, and people enjoying art. This is actually what Zurich West was built for, to have a place for everything. At the same time, what Zurich West also stands for is that things that are old are being remodeled, are kept in a way that they still look a bit authentic. So that's why we have all the brick stones that are still being in place. We have the silos that are still being in place. So this is exactly a perfect example of what Zurich West stands for. But I was again saying that it wasn't a flawless execution. Again, one of the criticisms that they have was that, for example, the rent price here, people live here, but the rent prices are way too high that any normal citizen could afford to have a flat. Basically, we just walk behind the residential building right now of the old brewery, and this is going to be, once again, if they're allowed to open it again, is going to be the entrance to the contemporary museum that is located within the exact same place where the house of the residence was and where the office buildings are. So, you can see it's a big construction site. And this is actually also a reality here in Zurich West, because Zurich West is changing a lot. This is also why, as a tour guide, I love to give the Zurich West tours, because every time before you do the tour, you have to open up a newspaper and look up what's new, what decision has been made, what buildings are being built. This is actually a reality of Zurich West as well. So, this was a quick, actually more of a teaser about what you can expect on the Zurich West tour. The tour is going to be generally about 90 minutes that you can enjoy at 3 p.m. at the Prime Tower. We hope that really that soon the borders open again and we can offer our tours again, and then we have our everyday downtown tours at 11 o'clock at Paradeplatz as well. So for the last time, if you have any questions about the Zurich West or anything that I have said, anything that wasn't clear, leave a comment below, and we hope to welcome you soon on our tours again. Thank you very much.